As far back as I remember, from the first day I could walk, I had a controller in my hand. I remember in my early childhood being glued in front of a bulky as hell CRT screen in a dark room, playing on my brother's SNES until I got kicked off. In just a short time, in comes around 1997 and bringing with it the jump to 3D. And 3D mascot in my life, in my childhood as the harbinger of a new generation of gaming, came in the shape of Super Mario 64. And from then on, I was permanently hooked. Just around the same time I was being exposed to video games, cinema was also leaving a lasting and formative impression on me. Family events would revolve around every Sunday going to the cinema and movie hopping, watching sometimes 3 movies at a time, VHS tapes of A New Hope to Hong Kong cinema and The Matrix on repeat over and over again at home. Then a thought popped into my head as I was watching The Matrix with my family for the umpteenth time. An idea dawned on me. Wouldn't it be cool to control movies just like a video game? Ever since I had my first SNES and N64 game, I was told that it would never amount to anything greater than what was described as cheap entertainment, like the Nickelodeons of the inception of cinema. I was reminded of the amount of time I'd spend playing games. It was something looked down upon for a long time while still being niche enough where you wouldn't outright say that you played games despite its expanding popularity. The late Roger Ebert famously opined a lengthy essay as to why they never will, stating, "No one in or out of the field has ever been able to cite a game worthy of comparison with the great poets, filmmakers, novelists, and poets." And yes, he did repeat poets for some reason. Despite Ebert's skeptical take on the video game format of expression and his personal ire and bias towards video games as a legitimate expression of art, the contrary to be proven time and time again, that video game writing stands alongside great poets, filmmakers, and novelists, and poets.
The truth is, I hated you. I wanted you out of the way. I wanted my life back.
James, if that were true, then why do you look so sad?
Mary?
James, please. Please do something for me. Go on with your life.
Just as painters were hesitant and dismissive of photography being a legitimate art form in its early inception, video games too would exemplify not only being as emotive and challenging, but do what other mediums previously could not. Of course, it's not to be dismissive and claim one is superior than the other, as all have their strengths and limitations that work best in its respective format. Cormac McCarthy's prose in Blood Meridian won't nearly translate to the same effect in film as the manga Vagabond to a novel. Each respective medium has its effective means of communicating and expressing. With video games as an early art form still, however, has shown great potential in expanding upon a well-realized foundation to achieve what was previously unimaginable, and what we are currently witnessing with both the video game and film industries merging. Over the course of the late 80s to early 90s, games such as Flashback, the original Ninja Gaiden, and early LucasArts adventure games would lay a framework of what it could be. While there were attempts at bridging video games and films during the 5th generation through FMV experimentation and implementing live action, the results were typically mixed. They'd felt either too much like a movie with little gameplay, or all gameplay with off-kilter FMVs mixed into 32-bit games that fell into uncanny valley territory. The FMV live action era was a time of trial and error, and its importance cannot be stressed enough. It wasn't until the new wave of console gaming's rise in popularity from the mid-90s to the mid-2000s where the video game community saw a cascade of cinematic experiences through innovative experimentation. It would soon become the standard of what was expected in AAA gaming and redefine narrative structure in video games. The industry exploded into a new direction during a short span of a decade. This era marked the transition from video games seen as entertainment to a serious contender in storytelling, with sales soaring as companies would begin to attempt investing into the market. Success or failure be damned. This particular generation spawned the cinematic video experience, but with that term being used so wantonly in the public zeitgeist, you just have to ask, what makes something cinematic? The term cinematic has been used ad nauseum colloquially with the accessibility and popularity of DSLR cameras in the early 2010s. Noah Baumbach's 2012 film Francis Ha and Shane Carruth's low-budget 2013 film Upstream Color arguably paved the way in its popularity. The appeal of low-budget cameras gave the impression of being able to shoot high-quality cinematic images without breaking the bank. From there, aspiring filmmakers would try to evoke the same fidelity as Super 16mm or 35mm. No longer does one have to deal with the high cost ceiling for quality. While the Danish film movement of Dogma 95 would attempt something similar nearly a decade prior to create compelling cinema with low budget equipment, the DSLR craze made another case in their argument of not requiring extravagant funds to create something cinematic. Cinematic is widely understood yet abstract to describe, something content creators from Instagram influencers to YouTubers, videographers, and even corporate producers would try to create. It was a huge buzzword that meant more than just fidelity. Yet practitioners wouldn't always land with the result they were hoping for, realizing that the idea or quality would elude them. According to Godard, cinema is truth 24 frames per second. And to me, when I first heard it in my earlier years of studying cinema, I had to stop and think exactly what he meant. Does shooting in 24 frames per second intrinsically make something cinematic? Capturing a visually pleasing image, or is it much more than the added sound and music cues, the right lighting, composition, and movement to be seen as cinematic? Godard's grand gesture statement isn't merely poetic language, but resonant in the idea of cinema being something much greater than that. Cinema as a whole includes several practices from photography, art production, blocking, acting, lighting, rhythm, emotion, through camera blocking and editing, and sound and music. And the mastery of all of these elements into a single sequence. Just as cinema is a combination of these practices and variations of form, video games too are just as an extension, if not on par, as the child of the medium blossoming out of a confined narrative space and time. Given the overlap between the two forms, what could be said of video games and its expressions since, like cinema, incorporates all the above? Where do they fit in? Instilling the spirit of Godard, what makes a game and film both truth in 24 frames is a distillation of the truth. Capturing an essence of humanity, whether abstract or literal, embedded in its works, life and vigor of the world and human condition, capturing the senses through the blending of these several mediums of light, camera, sound, story, and so on. Unlike film that captures this truth in its confined linearity despite efforts in challenging its limitations like Tarkovsky's Mirror, Roland Le Run, last year Amirenbad, La Jetée, and Pulp Fiction, video games extend beyond its narrative, and the interaction itself is the narrative emotion and the inherent experience at the leisure of the player. It is something film cannot expand upon despite its experimentation in the past and present, and very few mediums can really express and interact in the way video games can. With literature, music, installations, there's always a gap between the creator and the audience that condenses down to transmitter-receiver, and it's not to be dismissive of one or the other. An interview with David Lynch comes to mind in his transition from traditional painting to cinema in his college years, exploring cinema in his short films, and incorporating installation pieces in his sculptures. He wanted to see his paintings move and come to life.
Okay.
Let's take that photo.
Okay. Are we gonna distort?
Look at how beautiful those curtains
Maybe
look.
make a fall.
Look at that. Look at that.
So we can distort her and.
There was something within breathing in cinema that he could explore with, and that was untapped energy. In this case, video games too have shown to transcend this limitation in cinema itself. This creates an interactive installation piece the player sets into motion at their leisure and control. A puppet, the player explores narrative through interactivity and lives vicariously through their avatar in a three-dimensional installation piece.
You motherfucker!
The game is the gallery, the player more than the observer. And the thought of just interacting with the environment and studying the detail at your own pace, without having to rewind or pause or anything like that, is very beautiful to think about. With the influx of classics from the 90s to 2000s setting the foundation, we then reflect on whether video games have merit in being true cinema, but something with the potential to expand on the art form. What slow cinema sets out to do, for example, in having its audience live and experience the moments of life within long takes translates seamlessly into video games. What slow cinema auteurs such as Edward Yang, Ho Shou-shen, and Michelangelo Antonioni sought to do easily translates to video games. Audiences will hardly tolerate or outright reject Goodbye Dragon Inn or nostalgia, yet are more readily accepting of the in-between downtime. These minute moments in side quests that take the player's attention away from the main quest and emphasizes just that. Moments passing and being a participant in the life passing by you. We're reaching an apex for both, a literary and visual truth masked in a fictitious interpretation of reality. Yet, every respected medium giant from Dostoevsky to Caravaggio to Kurosawa, what they all have in common is that intangible yet palpable essence about their work, the thing that connects all of them so effortlessly, their humanity, and most of all, they're all cinematic. It is an invoked feeling and marriage of the respected mediums, yet with cinema as a catalyst for an immediate and visually stimulating experience, it takes the form of mediums and translates it into a sensory one.
喺我最需要一件雨褸嘅時候，呢樣嘢翻嚟我身邊啦。如果成日都落雨，你話幾好咧？
A film can be a poem, a moving painting, or a visual monologue. The natural progression of the passive viewer, the audience merely being a participant but not a player, is something not yet experienced in human history, let alone in the world of film's short life, and makes video games a unique interactive art piece in addition to cinema in itself for this reason. The closest thing to puppetry, another illusion built upon another illusion of 24 frames, or in the case of video games, 30 to 60 frames and up. And here, like any medium, recognize limitations of delivery and experience. Nabokov tried by writing a book where the reader jumps back and forth through its pages, from the index to the footnotes, all part of the assembly of the book itself to tell its story. John Cage wrote 4 minutes and 33 seconds, testing the limits of what constitutes as music, and audiences to participate during this time, to become and orchestrate the piece themselves solely through their participation with words, noises, and their presence. While they boldly all challenge the medium, still, we stand on the other side as receivers. What would it be like if the receiver can bend, mold, and have a sort of dialogue at their own pace and leisure with the creator's art piece rather than a passive audience in the sense of experiencing art from A to B? How would that then shape an experience when it becomes much more relative? Harmony Korine, in a 2023 interview with GQ, declared video games to be the new cinema, claiming that the new Call of Duty game looked better than anything Spielberg has made. Being an avid gamer, Korine's latest film Aggro Drift is coined by Korine himself to be the new subgenre of film called gamecore. He describes it as having the repetitive cadence of a video game cutscene, and with this tries and experimenting by blending both mediums. What we're trying to do is build some mechanics, he says, that allows people to interface with the footage and basically remix or make their own films. Even pushing further, begging discourse as both industries dramatically shifted over the course of 20 years, he questions, how do you take the whole idea of entertainment, of live-action gaming, and create something new? The obsession here is that there's something else after where we've been. That one thing is dying, and something new is being born right now. Harmony Korine isn't the only one either that shares a similar fondness and sentiment for the potential of video games as new cinema. From acclaimed film directors Nicholas Winding Refn, Guillermo del Toro, Alex Garland, and John Carpenter dipping their hands in video games, seeing the vast potential of bridging both mediums together.
This thing is f***ed. I'm sorry. It's completely f***ed.
Video game director Hideo Kojima sought to do just that in the early 90s, creating film through video games and giving players the autonomy over the leading roles, its actors being avatars to control, showing this ethos since the inception of the Metal Gear series and now Death Stranding. It's something that was unheard of and not taken seriously, let alone the idea of video game auteurism or a video game creator being seen as a voice just as a film director or writer would. His contemporary, the late auteur game director Kenji Eno, would champion and trailblaze alongside Kojima with the cult classics D series with this very concept in mind, and was ahead of his time for incorporating orchestral scores in his games, from Michael Nyman, who scored Jane Campion's Oscar-winning The Piano, to legendary avant-garde no-wave musician Otto Lenzi from DNA scoring D2. Eno understood the importance of sound, and sound being an integral part thematically to experience in his work. He'd be the first to elevate and blur the idea of a celebrity, and traditional concept of what an actor is, being the first to create the digital actress, a full year before the original Tomb Raider in the West took the industry by storm, and years later with Death Stranding starring Norman Reedus. Kojima emphasized to Reedus how he wants players to not just play the game, but fully immerse themselves and be the actor in this digital film. 20 plus years later from the release of D, controlling a film appears more plausible by the day. Oscar-nominated director Luca Guadagnino of Call Me By Your Name, Suspiria, and Challengers fame would praise Hideo Kojima's Death Stranding as the best film of 2019, and by that statement alone, recognizes how both film and video games are no longer exclusive, but now inseparable. In regards to the state of film today, we see how indeterminate it is, in its future and its scope, the intersection of these two giant mediums colliding into one another now. Something bruised under the surface and clear above the horizon for them to intersect beyond what was considered niche just barely 30 years ago. French filmmaker Robert Bresson reflected on interpreting how films are experienced and stated, quote, "I'd rather people feel a film before understanding it. Directors Abbas Kiarostami and Michael Mann shared a similar sentiment, expressing how the films they have fallen asleep to and felt rather than initially analyzed are the ones that haunt them for years. Even with the vague story or just a simple concise concept with games such as Journey or Shadow of the Colossus as sensory experiences, the enigmatic vagueness leaves the player in a similar state of pontification. Just as Tarkovsky's Stalker or David Lynch's Mulholland Drive leave audiences in a haze like waking from a half-remembered dream, video games too have reached this level of groundedness in our humanity, this pit of subconscious empathy and feeling as Bresson articulates. From my own personal experiences, there have been innumerable moments where I had been just as moved as I would from watching a Francois Truffaut's 400 Blows, Bresson's Pickpocket, or any Ingmar Bergman film. Numerous times these have left me despondent to deeply moved and hopeful, to having an epiphany of my own state of being in life. A reflective state as any art house film would elicit, reflecting on my own humanity and the shortcomings and trespasses in my life. Every game I play, I drown in the experience I explore. The filmmaker in me ties the elements of gameplay, art direction, music, and other practices within an analytical framework, asking myself, how are they motivated to make me feel? Is this piece cohesive? Is it successful? Just as I would analyze anything else from film to literature to painting, but at times I'm able to abandon that thought. And I would just only feel and experience what I'm seeing or what I'm having in front of me. Some of these titles work with surreal trappings as a lot of games upon retrospect very much do, and keep the logic abstract and distant enough yet distilled acutely into the respective statements. These few examples all share that unmistakable cinematic touch to them with that Bressonian logic of feeling rather than understanding what we experience just as a child would. A sponge to experience the world anew, cinema that revitalizes, as we take away something new into our lives in whatever shape or form. A cinematic image is life as it is and isn't, as both a poem and a play, whether cued with music, movement, lighting, or simply quiet expressions of pain. What carries in the lie of images as our brains try to catch up. What makes us feel is the closest thing to reality becoming real through emotion, and to me, that's cinematic. I just want to take the time and say thanks for checking this video out. It's the first of many to come, and we'll definitely have more coming down the line. Thanks again, guys. Take it easy. I'll see you in the next one.